Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today on our Contrail Training Series webinar. This is our March edition on how to customize a great homepage. My name is Lindsay Neatis. I'm a Customer Engagement Manager with OneRain and AEM, and I'm happy to be taking you along on this journey with me today. This is going to be a more interactive as I build out a homepage that hasn't yet been customized, rather than pointing out the individual features and how one would theoretically do it. We're going to go through the process of actually building out a new homepage for this new client that I'm working on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Got to switch myself over so we see the Contrail homepage. All right, here we are. We can see that I am already a logged in user, in that the admin button is available to me. And when I click on the user profile button, there is also me showing my username and not password, just the username and display name for my current logged in account, as well as the option to log out. When we're building a new homepage, this is going to be the homepage that's going to be seen by anybody as they access your Contrail instance. These homepages are not unique to your own user account, but rather will show for anybody who is logging in, or if Contrail is available to the general public on your server, the general public will see all of these components as well. Now, there are some features that can be marked as published and privileged using those visibility options that we've come to see in many other components in Contrail. So you may be able to adjust your homepage content based on that. However, we want to make sure that the way that we're presenting things is clean and appropriate for the audience that you expect to be using the software. So one thing that I do want to emphasize here is that we are going to be doing this all on the admin side of Contrail, say for where we're actually previewing the changes that we're making. So in order to be able to access these features in Contrail, your user account will need to have the web privilege assigned to your user account. That is specific for changing the logos, changing the background, and again, modifying this homepage content. So that's going to be the big privilege level that will be required for the majority of what we'll be working on today. And for those who don't know, if you want to check what your user privilege levels are, you can go up to that profile button and click on your display name. This gives you an overview of what your user account is, some summary actions, and again, that summary of privileges that your user account might have, including anything from the admin side, looking at users, systems, deleting sites, down to the general user side, those view options, or maybe accessing reports, creating alarms, and then our web option right there, that's the one that we'll be working on today. Awesome. So I'm going to open up the admin component in a new tab. I like keeping my tabs separate when I'm working on a homepage, so that way I'm coming back to the homepage, refreshing it, and seeing those changes that I make as I'm making them. We don't have a staging site, anything like that. So as you are updating your Contrail homepage, those changes will be seen live. Momentarily after you hit that save button, you'll be able to see that change. So just kind of a note of caution as you're working on things here. So let's click on that admin button, move into a new tab, and now I'm going to go over to the web component. I can access this either from the tile on the right-hand side or under configuration and web. Both will take me to the same module here. So the first detail that I want to cover is kind of one of the most basic, straightforward, but one of the most noticeable. And that's going to be looking at the logos that we have on this user side in Contrail. You'll see we have two different logos in place. One is typically more icon-based, and we recommend that it is within the constraints of 70 by 70 pixels. The second one is going to be more text-based, and we recommend that that one, it falls within the constraints of 140 by 70 pixels. Now, you can kind of go a little bit above, or as you can see, a little bit below that, but that's our best resolution that we've found that works, most uniformly across the board. We also like to keep those resolutions and those sizes on the smaller side, because that way, if someone's accessing your Contrail page on their mobile phone or any other devices that might require a data connection, that page loads quickly, efficiently, and without consuming excessive data resources. So in order to change that primary logo, what we're going to do is either click on the edit button or simply click on the image itself. We can load a file that is locally already stored on the server or from another website, or we can upload our own file in this case. I don't have one preset on the server, so we're going to upload my new file here. And when I click on File or click on Browse, that opens up a new browser, and it didn't show in this window, so I'll drag that over here. And we're going to go for the AEM icon image that I have here. I can also update this alternative text. So where does that take place? If I go over back to my home page and hover over that image, that's what would come up as the hover if that image could not load for whatever reason. Now, the pop-up's not showing on my shared screen right now, but I'm seeing it on my end. So that's where that text comes in. I'm simply going to update this to AEM Contrail so that I've changed it, show you that it can be changed here. Now, when I'm done with that icon, I'll click Save, and I can see first that my logo has loaded and updated, and that it falls within my recommended pixel count. This is 48 by 48, falls underneath 70, and we'd show something, indicating that it would be a little bit over if it fell over our recommendations here. So now, just to prove that these changes are made quickly, I refresh my page, and we see that new logo already in place here. So now let's go ahead and do our secondary logo. Same manner, clicking on either the image or the edit button. I can locally choose a file or find one on the web. I'm going to upload a new file here. Again, I've got a text-based version for the AEM icon. Click Save, and now we've got that in there. Again, 140 by 48 pixels, so it'll line up real nicely. Click Refresh, and we see that update instantaneously. So some of you may ask, why do we have a two logo approach like this? Well, it really has to do with the way that we look at the resizing of a page. You've noticed now that we do not have a separate mobile application for Contrail or a separate tablet application for Contrail. Everything's accessed within the web browser, so we expect to have a web browser that is responsive. We want to be able to see the same content, maybe just reordered a little bit to accommodate for a smaller screen size, whether that be a different laptop size, a different monitor size, your cell phone, your tablet. We still want to have all of that same content. So if I go ahead and take this image, and we're going to ignore my background on how we have that loading presentation in the back, but as I shrink my screen, you can see here that it has rearranged. That secondary icon is no longer showing because it really kind of doesn't make sense for a smaller screen resolution like this. This kind of mimics what things will look like on your mobile device instead. And when I click on that menu button, we still see that I still have all of those same options, just reordered slightly. So that way we're able to access that content and not accidentally click the wrong buttons on a smaller screen size. So as I've said, we've got those two logos in here now. That's updated. Let's go back to our web component, see what other changes we can make. So I can upload a background image or change that background color. I'm going to go in here, and instead of loading an image, I'm going to change the color, mostly just to show you what that color specifically looks like. And I will say I've got a specific color in mind. I'm just going to go try to find the hex code for it, so that I can really match it to the appropriate theme here. Oftentimes when I'm creating these, I'll be looking at a specific somebody's website, or I'll be looking at specific components to see how can we really tie this in to what their agency's already designated themes are. So I'm copying and pasting this kind of burnt orange color in with the hex code that I know is appropriate for AEM, and I'll click Save. Now, I'm probably not going to leave it like this because this is going to be pretty colorful. But as I've refreshed, we can now see what does that background component change. That's going to be that strip along the top here. And you'll also see these changes that we're making don't impact the admin side in Contrail. All of these thematic elements only show up on the user side in Contrail. So I'm actually going to take that white or restore that white background, as I think that's a lot of color going on at the top. And for me, that doesn't match the aesthetic that I'm going for in this. But mostly wanted to show this as an example because it's pretty obvious where that background goes now that I've changed that color. So if I want to change that background color, we're just going to go back, select that edit button, and background color, instead of leaving it at the current hex, we're going to restore it to white, which I believe is 6Fs. Yep, 6Fs is white. I always forget if it's the Fs that are white or if it's the zeros that are white. All zeros is black. All right, so we've got the white color there. click save, and now we can go back, refresh my page, and see that I've restored back to that white background. I think that's a little bit more clean in this case personally. All right, so that's kind of the first step of how are we going to really tie in any thematic elements for our agency, for our organization, for the group that we're working in with here. Next component that I want to work through is going to be really the bread and butter of what we'll be working on today, and that's going to be in the pages element. This is where we create our home page itself. So we'll go over to that pages side, and you'll see from this pages place that we do have the ability to add in new pages, but I want to say that with a word of caution because it's not truly adding new pages. It's really more along the lines of how do we add elements to an existing page. If we want to add a new page, my workaround is to let's add a new dashboard and build that up with the components that we're looking for. Because Contrail doesn't truly support the addition of new pages and new custom naming of those pages. So since we're kind of following along that line, we're taking a home page and adding content to it, we're going to click on that home option. And that home option will be showing on everybody's client by default. That is already defined. So when you start from scratch, typically there's going to be one column. It's going to be in widget basis. It's going to be titled Welcome using the default presentation in HTML format. This is how we see things when the client is spun up from scratch and before any changes have been made. Now, we're going to build this out using widgets for the most part today. Some of you may remember, years ago in Contrail, how the majority of those home pages were actually built using HTML and CSS components. If that's something you're comfortable with and you have those technical skills to maintain that, that is absolutely fine and you can continue to use that format. You'll simply continue to use HTML widgets and the source code component of those HTML widgets. And that will look a lot like the standard text editor that you've been using for years and years. We've simply added the ability to use widgets instead because we understand that a lot of our audience don't necessarily have the same technical skills and those details in their background. And we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to customize their homepage and really maintain that, update that without the technology being a barrier. So today we're going to use kind of a mix of that. We'll use a few basic HTML skills, but a large component of it is going to be through the widgets infrastructure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this bit. So I'm going to start from scratch and remove this widget from my canvas, I guess, and start with what I have as a vision here. So we'll just go ahead, delete that widget out, and we'll be adding in rows and columns of widgets similarly to what we would be doing in Contrail. I do have a specific idea of what I'm looking for in mind. However, sometimes this is going to be a little bit of a more iterative process for individuals. They'll add components, refresh the page, see that that doesn't look quite like what they were expecting, and go back, edit things, change the size of the widget or move it around to a different component. So that way they can see, what does this look like for each individual user. For me, like I said, I kind of know what I want to do today, so we'll go through those particular details and you'll see a few different examples of how we'll set this up. So my first component that I'm going to add today is going to be across the top. My idea is to add an image across the top, kind of like a banner, not the background across the top, but simply in the home page itself. So I want, because it's going across the full size, we'll have one column across the top taking up 100% of that first row that we create. Let's add to that column a new widget, and we'll see widget types. So let's select that menu, and what I'm looking for here is actually going to be what we call a card image. It's going to take up the entire panel or card in this particular widget. So as I select that, you'll see my page does refresh, and we'll be able to see new details here. So do I want to add a name? Well, we have to add a name to every widget just so that we have some element for sorting and storage in the database. So I'm going to call this my header image, but I don't want that name to show. So I'm going to disable the name from its visibility. You'll see here we do have those published and privileged options. As a reminder, published means it will show up on the user interface. Privileged means that only logged in users with the privileged privilege on their user account will be able to see that component. I'm going to leave those at their default today. So we'll take the name, hide that. We could add a description if we wanted to. A URL would turn that name into a clickable link, and that target would apply to that URL then. Since the name is hidden, I'm going to leave all of these all these fields blank here. Then we've got the height. I like to leave it at automatic, but we can change that height by default. What type of an image? Well, in this case, this panel type is going to describe if there's text here, how is that defined? Does it go on top of the image, on the bottom of the image, or is it overlaid over the image? Since I've hidden the name, it doesn't really matter which I choose, but oftentimes when I'm setting up a new one, I'll do overlay image, and that will show the title straight across the image, kind of as a hero element on that page. So we can select many different options here. Next, I will click the next button. Similar to our dashboard widgets, that first page describes how everything is going to look. The next page describes the data that we want to pull in. The data field here is if we're going to encode, stylistic elements. Typically, that's a little higher than what I'll do. We just want to make sure that we add the path so that we source the image correctly. Well, you'll see we don't have a browse option here to upload an image specifically. So we've got two different options. One is going to be to find the image elsewhere on the web and drop in that URL. Otherwise, I can upload our image into the file storage component on Contrail and then take the path from that and drop that in. That is the option that we're going to go with today, because personally, I prefer to leave my images on the Contrail server. So that way, if somebody else's web page goes down or they change the image out there, I'm not reliant on that particular link. So we'll click on an open web in a new tab so that I can access that files manager. Click on the files manager and we can see currently no files to find. We're going to change that right now. Clicking on add to add a new file. And now we can browse for that file. I have a header that I'm going to put across. I'm going to call this the home page header. I can also put in an additional description, file details, why, when I uploaded it, who uploaded it, etc. Now I click save. I can see that home page header right there, who uploaded this and when, as well as all of those details. Now, the real detail of interest for me is this path right here. You'll see it doesn't start with HTTPS or have your domain name in it. That's because we're using this as more of a local reference in that we already know that we're on the Contrail server, so we don't need that domain bit. It's kind of like when you're looking at your computer and you're logged in as your individual user and you're kind of navigating to different areas on your computer, and you'll see the downloads folder or you'll see the documents folder, but you don't always see that full address because some of it's kind of just implied. So I'm going to copy that path here because it's already on the server. I don't need that domain name. And now I'll go back to that tab where I'm actually adding this element. Paste that in there, and we'll go ahead and click save. So now I have that first component of my home page. We'll go back to my home page, hit the refresh button, and see how that looks so far. So far, we've got this great element across the front. Looks very, interesting, engaging to the eye. So now we're going to start adding some more descriptive elements about what's happening. We've drawn folks in with this image. Let's put in some detail about why is somebody coming to this page? What can they do with this information? How can they navigate to different components that we like? So I'll return to my page editor. And let's add a new row of information. I personally like to use columns and rows to break down the format, the layout of things, keep things in different, sizes to really kind of cause that interesting element here. So let's go ahead to add a new row. We'll click the plus sign next to widgets and we see row layout. Well, as I click on layout, you'll see a bunch of different pre-formatted elements for up to 4 column spreads. And we can see that, different items, how do we want to break this down? I think I'm going to go with a 2-column split where the left column is going to be larger than the right column. Click save. And now we can kind of see that general idea of a layout so we can drop in those widgets. This first widget that I'm going to put in is going to have some text in it. So if we're doing just general text, that's going to be of the HTML widget type. So in here, we'll call this the description. Again, I don't want that name to show here because I've got some text that I'm going to paste into a text box. So I'm going to turn that name off. But again, those same elements apply with the description, URL, and target, all referring to that name if visible. I like to leave this one at its automatic height as well. Same goes with, well, we only have one panel type here, so no problem there. Click next to move us to the next page. And this is that WYSIWYG editor, the what you see is what you get text editor that you've come to know and really work with in our previous editions of Contrail without those widgets on the home page. If that's still what you want to work with, totally fine. You can use this as a basic text editor or go under tools and source code to drop in any HTML, JavaScript, CSS, stylistic elements straight into the source code. I do have a pre-formatted blurb that I'm going to be dropping in here, so that I will be using this particular element in the source code. I'm copying it from a notepad that I have from, some source from previously and pasting that into the source code. As I hit OK, you'll see that some of those already use specific header styles or bold or italicized elements. So I'm happy with the way that this looks. I could, if I saw spelling errors, easily just type in, change a word, and add to this as well. I simply just didn't want to recreate the wheel, so that's why I dropped it into my source code instead. So now I click save. I'll see again in that first column, my description uses the HTML widget and the panel type is default. Now, as I return to my home page, I can click that refresh button. And there we go. We have our descriptive text right there in that particular style. We can see where it goes. And, I think there's too much of a gap there. I might go ahead and edit that widget because I think there's a little bit too much spacing happening with that widget. So let's return to that page and I want to make an edit to the text or an edit to the data. So I'll click the data button. It looks like 3 stacked coins or a cylinder here. Clicking on that, I'm going to remove that first space in the file and then click save. So when I go back and return here, this gap at the top is a little bit less. That's closer to what I'm thinking for visually. So I'm happy to see that. Now, the next bit, I'm going to add another image in here. This is going to be a smaller image. Again, this one is going to be using that HTML content. Now, why am I using HTML instead of, you probably saw there's an image dropdown. Well, I have a trick up my sleeve with how I want to encode a link behind this image rather than having a link in the text. So I'm going to call this Contrail image plus link. Turn the name off again, and I've got that again in that HTML because in this case, this is where I'm using this to kind of encode using some of my HTML skills that I have. This isn't going to be a step that everybody wants to follow, and that's totally fine. We'll finish this up by uploading an image at the bottom of the page using that image widget type shortly. So now I'll click save and we'll see again my blank editor. I'm going to open up my source code and drop in this blurb that I've already have styled out. As I drop this in, we'll see details such as div tags showing this how this is supposed to be divided out. I'm removing stylistic element across the bottom because there's not really anything added here. But as we look in here, I have a link encoded in here with that href. And it links to our Contrail software solution page on our home page. And then I've also got my image tag in here indicating that this is going to also show an image that you can click on and that image itself will be a link. So this is something that I picked up. This is not a skill that is required for working with Contrail. And I do want to emphasize this. I'm being a little fancy here with the way that I want to make this look, but you can absolutely continue to work within the realms of the widgets that we have developed, designed for you, so that way you can create similar content. So as I click OK, we'll see that image right there. I'm going to click save once more, and we have that secondary Contrail image link on that side. Now, when I click my refresh page, you'll see we have that second image there, and if I click on it, it serves as that link that takes me to our homepage for the Contrail software on our company website. Awesome. So far, so good. I'm happy with the direction that we're heading. Let's go ahead and continue to add new content. Now, this is a part that I like to typically go ahead and throw in details about how do we navigate through this? How can I highlight components that I think are useful to the general user? So I use menu links. Sometimes this is going to simply just be a list if you have a few. If you have quite a few links you want to highlight, I recommend using things like a dropdown. So in this case, we're going to add in another row of widgets because I have a different format for columns in mind. Going to, in this case, go for a 3-3-3 split, and I want those equally split out. So we'll go for 33% across the board. All right, we've got this new column in here. Let's start with column 1. Now, I wanted to say, like I said, a drop down, but there's also a links list that you can use if that's something that is preferable. So we'll use that drop down here, type in the name. This first one is going to be a list of different rain map resources. So I'll simply call this one rain. This time I am going to leave the name on because I want that rain to be the name shown across this drop down. The first thing when I put in here, I'm going to copy in one of my links. This will be what happens if someone just clicks the rain button rather than opens the drop down. And since it's within Contrail, I like to use the same window, but ultimately it's really your decision on how you want this to flow. If you want to open in a completely new window, in a new tab, how you want this to kind of display. Now, again, I like to use my automatic height. We do have a default panel type, but now we've got different types for what color do we want to show this button in, and how do we want this to display across. Now I'm going to go with some of the things that I personally like to use. I like to go with the dark theme, and I like to go default black. However, you can change this up, and it will use the elements that are encoded in the software that we have. Basically, there are some set components where primary is one color, secondary is another color, and it follows the theme that we have going across with Contrail, so that way you're really able to see those particular colors. If you want to do custom colors, unfortunately, that is one of those cases where you will need to encode an HTML element using the HTML side of things and create an object, a button, through that element instead. But we have a variety of different colors already pre-listed and available for you in here. So I recommend going with those if you're able to work with that. So now we'll click the next button and see what these options are. And this is where I'll add the links that go in my dropdown. So I have, again, a note kind of with what I wanted to include in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste a few of those from my note. Click in the name. The target is fine being the same window because these are all elements going to be within Contrail. And then if I want to add attributes as well, encode different stylistic details, I can, but I'm going to leave that one blank personally. Now we click the add button to add a new thing in the link, and we'll just keep going down that general list until we have the links that we want in this particular dropdown. So we'll click that, a couple of copy and pastes. I've just got 2 more that I plan on putting in here. And I will also say, I highly recommend, as you're creating these pages, start writing a list as to what components, what elements do you want to feature, what are the links that you want to show, because that makes it so much easier rather than having to go and hunt for all of these different links as you're trying to create this page. It's nice to have an organized list in advance as much as you can, just so that you can easily pull this information together all at once. So we can see I've got that one drop down there. We'll return to my home page and click the refresh to see what this looks like. And there is my drop down. If I click on it, it will take me over to that map page showing the latest rain increment values. Or I can open up that drop down and we'll see the latest report and all of those different links I put in there. All right, onward we go. So this is where we can kind of start doing the same thing across the board. I like to keep my drop downs all the same color, but other people might change the colors, the shapes to highlight different options that are available. For me, I've said this before, I don't like to recreate the wheel. I don't like to do more work than necessary. So in this case, what I'm going to do is actually copy my existing widget. That way I can simply take the exact same format and then just update the content inside of it rather than doing it over and over and over again. So I've clicked that copy option up in the top for my widget. I want to assign it a new name because rain is already in use. I don't need a description, and I want to update the URL in there as well. All right, click save, and that's showing up in the first column. Well, let's move that to the second column. To do so, I will click the edit option, and in options on the right side, you'll see we can move it into a different row if I wanted, or a different column. So I want this in column number 2. I can change details about any of this, but what I really want to do is update those links that exist in there, because otherwise it's still going to have all of my rainfall links. So I'll click save and next. And as we see, rainfall links in here. Well, that's just not right. So let's go ahead and update that with my new links that pertain to water level instead. Copy and pasting a few of these in here. Oh, looks like I didn't copy very well. There we are. Moving in a flow one. And then last but not least, also related to water, is tides information. Now, I'm out of my links. I don't have any more, so I'm going to click the X button next to my existing ones to shorten my list. That way I have only those that I actually need in place. We'll click save. And now as I scroll through, we see that widget is moved into column number 2. I can go back to my home page, refresh, and we see that new widget in there again. Now, some of you, as I'm clicking on these, may be asking, why is the pop-up going up instead of down? Well, that's because if I try to scroll to the bottom of the page, it looks like I'm already at the bottom of the page. And this menu wouldn't fit on the bottom of the page. So it automatically knows not enough space to open down. So it's going to act as a drop up until there's more content on the bottom of the page. Okay, one more element I want to add to this particular row before we move on to my final row here. So we'll open the same water level dropdown. I'm going to copy this one once more and add my final list of resources. I like to have one that just has a mass list of other resources, links that I find useful. And now, since I copied that water level, we'll see it's still in that column number 2. So let's go ahead, move that to the final column over to column number 3 and update my list of links that I have in here. This is going to include a link to the AEM homepage. And personally, when I'm working with a website, I like to have it where if it's in the same website, open in the same window. If we're leaving that website, let's open that in a new window instead. That's personally my preference with the flow, but everybody has different concepts, different ideas that they like to follow throughout. So no worries if what I'm doing doesn't quite align with your preferences. You have the ability to set this up on yours to make better sense for your personal preferences as well. So we're going to drop those links in there. Those are all new windows now. Remove my extra and click save. Great, we see that in my third column. We can return to the home page. Otherwise, one of the things that I want to point out, in this options, there is a new window button. This will simply take me back to that home page once more, and we can review it like that as well. All right, so with that home page being updated, we've got those other categories for resources and other content. Now, finally, let's go ahead. I said I wanted to add one more image using the actual image editor once more. So let's go through and add a final image. This is going to be something like a footer across the bottom. I want to describe, who's working for this company, who are our individual brands, or maybe resources that contribute to this agency. So that's going to be a 1-row layout. Click save. And now I've got that final column. Let's add a widget this time. So widget, we'll select image. I'm going to call this the footer. And again, I don't not need this name to show up, so I'm going to turn the name off and leave these elements blank. Since we're adding simply an image, I can go ahead and leave the display at its defaults and click save. Now, once more, we're at that path page where I need to add an image in this case. So we'll go back to our files. I'm going to upload my footer image real quick so that we have that available. And actually, as I look at my notes, I think I've used it already in another place on this server. So I don't need to add this one. I can simply paste it in there. However, here we've got a note that we could use the proxy here. When should you use the proxy? Well, that's going to be if you are linking to content that is non-secure. That is, it is located at a website using HTTP instead of HTTPS. All Contrail cloud servers, as well as Contrail shared web pages, use HTTPS. And if we introduce elements from pages that use HTTP, that can actually compromise the security of the server potentially. So we don't want to have those potential pathways for error into the server. So we'll run it through the proxy instead. It does require a few more admin steps that I'm not going to get into, but I simply wanted to describe what does this mean and when might you use it. In this case, this resource is already on the server, so I don't need to use the proxy. We'll click save. I have that image there. Now let's return to my home page. And we'll see we've got this great big footer at the bottom. And since I've added more content, my drop downs now actually drop down instead of up because they have enough space to hit the bottom of the page. So this is what I would consider my first working draft of this website. I might revisit this and add more details, subtract details, say, you know, these elements don't really flow together yet, but I can continuously come back and make those changes along the way using those widgets to really track the details. So other things that I want to highlight about what we can do with our homepage before we call today quits is first off, our bookmarks option. Bookmarks are something I kind of added in a drop down on the homepage, but this one is one that's actively tracked through the software rather than me having to add a homepage element. As I hover over bookmarks, you'll see we've got two different types for personal and shared. Personal are going to be associated with your own user account, so I won't focus on those so much today. Instead, shared are going to be bookmarks that help describe what is happening with your individual, or I'm sorry, lost my train there. Shared bookmarks help highlight components of the software and are available for anybody who has access to that homepage. So that might be the general public, or it might be simply your logged in users. And you can see we've got those standard visibility options with published and privileged here. Now I'm going to go ahead, add some bookmarked components. For example, you may be familiar with our rain or level summary pages. So I'm going to add a rain summary bookmark. I can add the title for when I hover over it. What is that going to look like? And then what is that URL? Well, for something outside of Contrail, I'd type in the HTTPS //www. everything else. This is a Contrail resource, so I'm simply going to locate it where it is on the server. And again, target is going to be same window. Now, as I'm adding this bookmark, this is something that I have on my list to add here and may be different from what you yourself are particularly looking for. So no worries there, mostly using this to showcase that this is a possibility. I can also go to a specific page and I can add a bookmark for that specific page. So if I wanted to highlight air temperature and there's specific, you know, wow, this is a warming streak that I really like, I could go to my bookmarks from here, click on shared, and it will pre-populate with this URL by default, helping me highlight that particular resource. So I'm going to cancel because I don't really care so much for that particular one. I'm going to finish by adding that level bookmark that I want in here, and that's going to be my level summary, and it's level, and that's located at level. And I still want that to open in the same window. Super. So we have my two bookmarks in shared, and when someone's accessing this without having a login, but it's shared with the general public, they won't have the option to add to shared or personal bookmarks because they're simply just viewing this web page. All right, now maybe you've been with us for a while and you're wondering, there's a couple icons missing from the top. What's up with that? Well, like I said, this is a new instance of Contrail, and there are two components where we hide those icons if those components aren't enabled, and those are going to be dashboards and news. So in this case, let's go ahead, add a news article or two, see what happens when we add that information in. News articles are managed, again, from the web management module. So I'm in here, back in the admin side, looking at web. In this case, it's going to be managed under news. So I'm selecting news, and we'll go ahead, see no post defined. Well, that would explain why we're not seeing anything there. clicking that add button, and we'll see the options to create a name and then add content to our post. We can mark it as published or privileged again, and we can even pin it to the top of the home page. So let's go ahead and try a few of those. So first one I'm going to put in is just an old post that I was working on previously. There is some formatting embedded in here, so rather than pasting it into content or typing it out, I'm going to simply paste it into my source code. That's how I'm doing this because I'm taking a couple shortcuts, but you could easily type it out in here, select which elements you want to be bold or not bold, create links, add images, etc., simply through using the editor as it comes. Click that save button, and we'll see first off, one news article. How does that impact things? Well, looking at our posts, we now see details showing and summarizing one news article. One is published, 0 are not published, and 0 are marked as privileged. As I go back to my home page and refresh, we'll now see that news component shows up here. This is going to be a fun bit, is if I go back to this and mark one of these as unpublished, it exists, I'm not deleting it, I just don't want it to show on the user side. Well, now we'll see the not published symbol on the admin side. And as I go back here, that icon hides again. That's because technically there's content that is not meant to be shown on the user side in Contrail. So let's go ahead, add in another image or two. We're going to go back to our post, or not another image, another news post or two. Add in this new post here. We're going to paste in some of these details. And again, this is stuff that I'm pulling from other areas of the software, so it does have formatting embedded. So I like to drop that into source code instead. We can see, oh, there's a fourth header. It's in bold text, specific page breaks and links encoded. That's fine. We'll load that information in here. Contrail 8 is here, and click save. Awesome, all sorts of links, information happening. Now, because that's not marked as unpublished, I can refresh and see that news point again. We see only those articles that are marked as published, but none of those that are, marked as unpublished. Now, the final thing I want to highlight, what does a pinned news post look like? Well, that's going to be if we drop in this information, and this one doesn't have any encoding. It's simply just a very straightforward description of what this post is. Let's mark that as pinned instead. I click save, and I can see first off, it's a pinned post. Looking at that news article, we see those icons describing what's happening. And as I refresh my news page, we have that with a pin. Well, let's go back to the home page. All right, so that's what our pinned post is. It shows up first and foremost in that home card on the home page, which really serves as a way to highlight a current situation or details that you want to have available. We have also the updated address or the updated detail in here. So that way you know when was this posted or modified. So that way it's truly up-to-date information. If I had a ton of text in here, I could simply click on that link at the top and it would describe all of the details in depth as well. All right, that gives us our news component. That final bit of what can we add in here is going to be that dashboard icon. So it's going to be similar, and I'm not going to get into the full, let's create a full-on dashboard today. I'm just going to create something basic as a dashboard example. So that way we can see that dashboard icon will show up in the same manner as soon as I create a dashboard. So we'll call our dashboard called dashboard. Really creative. We're going to click save. Doesn't have any content in it, doesn't have any details, but we have something defined. Now, when I return back to my home page, and I've lost a couple tabs now, we'll see the dashboards icon shows across the top. So those two details, news and dashboards, will hide automatically if those components either don't have any details defined or if they are marked as published or privileged only. They'll be hidden so that way only the appropriate users can see those components. Otherwise, details such as home, map, and sites will always show to all users. Why? Well, there will always be a home page. The map is a consistent source within the user interface in Contrail, and same goes with that list of sites. To a general user who is just accessing the software and doesn't have edit details or a user account, that bookmarks component may also be hidden if no bookmarks are defined. But other than that, these icons are not currently customizable. We can, hide 2 of them if there is no content, but other than that, those are standard defaults within the software. All right, this does bring me to an end of what I wanted to cover today. I'm really excited with the content that we've created, how I can continue working through this, and I've set up a really great place for me to start with this particular client that I'm working on spinning up. I do also hope that this has given you some ideas as to where can you take your homepage and how can you update it to maybe feel a little bit more fresh, a little more modern, or simply update the content so that way it's, you know, the most relevant information possible to your organization. I do want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you'll join me next time. Next month, I believe we're looking at dashboards. I have to double check on that on my list. Give me one moment. I should have had that up and running and ready to go from the start, but here I am. Next month that's what I thought. Next month is going to be analysis at a glance, creating custom dashboards and real-time widgets. And this is going to take place on Thursday, the 13th of April, same time as we're currently used to. So I'm excited for you to join me then, and I will also stay online for a little bit longer.